Hey guys, what do you like most about 40k? Is it the setting as a whole? Maybe certain factions? Maybe you love the Eldari, those tall, lanky weirdos who somehow all seem to be born with what is now a completely undeserved superiority complex. You might love the Necrons, those metallic, soulless weirdos who somehow all seem to hold on to their always undeserved superiority complex. Perchance, you're a fan of humanity, the race that isn't really all that impressive physically, psychically, or morally, and yet still maintain a pretty crazy superiority complex. Maybe you love the Tau, those relatively unproblematic aliens who, despite being a lot less purely bad than pretty much every other race in the galaxy, also still have a crazy, ridiculous superiority complex. And maybe, just maybe, you're a fan of the Orcs, who are big and green, and have a big green Unga Bunga complex. Now, I understand all of those perspectives, and I think it's easy to see why each faction thinks that they can claim the title of best in the galaxy, or as the Orcs would say, the bestest in the big everywhere. But in all of the countless conflicts that never cease to rage across the Imperium, I find a lot of enjoyment in factions and especially characters who just fight for the sake of it. No big plans, no plots, no goals, no thoughts, other than me see lots of living stuff. Me gonna kill living stuff. Living stuff dead now. So get your finest glue and your reddest crayons ready, because today we'll be talking about the character that acts as the epitome of that philosophy, Angron the Red Angel. Angron doesn't plot. He doesn't think ahead. He just does what he does best. And what he does best is eviscerating everything in his path while roaring really loudly and eating people. He's like that T-Rex from Jurassic Park, but dumber. And in a setting like 40k, where there is nonstop plotting, intervention in other people's plotting, or plotting to intervene in other people's plotting, being able to witness the carnage left behind by a giant red insane maniac who doesn't even know where he is most of the time is oddly refreshing. However, it would be irresponsible of me not to point out the extremely obvious. Angron now just exists as a plot device, more than anything else, a huge huffing, puffing punching bag who shows up just to eventually get defeated and banished back to the warp so that some Imperial characters can be declared to be very brave and cool heroes. But before he was in his current state, back when he was still a member of the Imperium, waging war across the galaxy in the name of humanity, he was one of the most tragic characters that has ever existed or will ever exist in 40k. Angron's gestation pod landed on Nuceria, a planet ruled over by a wealthy oligarchic elite known as the High Riders, who distracted the impoverished masses that they ruled over with regular gladiatorial death matches. The general population of Nuceria had become so bloodthirsty over the years that these gladiatorial matches had become the main source of entertainment on the planet, and since, believe it or not, gladiatorial death matches tend to see the deaths of a lot of gladiators, the oligarchs were in constant search of fresh bodies to throw in the meat grinder. Enter baby Angron, who emerged from his gestation pod and was immediately attacked by a squad of elite craft world Eldari warriors, likely because they had foreseen that he would eventually turn into a gigantic evil demon monster with the power to slaughter entire worlds, and decided that they would prefer that he didn't do that. Please note that at the beginning of that sentence, I said baby Angron. Yeah. He was a baby, a Primarch baby, made with the DNA of an immortal magic warlord who actually ended up being a god, but still, pretty impressive that he just dummied some of the most elite fighters in the galaxy. This was basically the very first turn one charge in 40k history. And most of us know the rest of Angron's upbringing, so let's make this brief. The future demon Primarch of Khorne was found by a slaver, who, for some reason, was hiking around in the highest reaches of the Deshelica Mountains. The slaver saw that there was a giant human baby laying in the snow surrounded by dead aliens, and realized he had hit the evil slaver who collects children to become gladiators jackpot. He took Angron to Deshea, Nuceria's capital city, and sold him to the ruling High Rider family. Angron, much to his horror, found immediate success in the fighting pits of Deshea. In his very first fight, he found himself in a pit with platforms of various heights. The pit began to fill with acid, and the hundreds of slaves in the pits quickly realized that the only survivor would be the one that could stand on the final, highest platform, which was large enough for only one of them. Angron proved to be that final warrior, having had to kill numerous people in his quest for survival. And he took no pleasure in taking lives. In fact, he actually began to kill people as mercifully as possible after realizing that throwing them into the acid alive was not a great way to die. As the months passed, Angron quickly grew from giant baby size to giant man size, and his reputation as a fearsome but honorable warrior grew as well. He found a mentor in the arenas, an older gladiator named Enemaus, who became something of a father figure to young Angron. After the two of them defeated a pair of enraged Ogren berserkers who had been implanted with the butcher's nails, the High Riders demanded that their two greatest gladiators fight to the death. In response to this demand, Angron got very angry. That's going to be a common theme moving forward. Like, I cannot stress how much of a common theme that's going to be. And the High Riders subsequently forcefully implanted the butcher's nails into his brain. This made Angron very angry, very all the time, and when he was forced to square off against Onemaus again, he tore him apart without hesitation. When he eventually returned to his senses, he swore that he would lead a revolt, free his fellow slaves, and make the High Riders pay. And eventually, when that day came, the revolt was successful. Angron was able to lead nearly 2,000 gladiators through the Dashaean guards that were supposed to keep them focused on each other and into the streets of the city, and then into the mountains outside of the city where Angron had first landed. The High Riders would send numerous armies into the mountains to kill or capture the gladiators, but every time Angron and his gladiators would fight them off. Unfortunately, constantly fighting a well-supplied military while living in snow-covered mountain passes with very little food eventually led to quite a few deaths. And when the High Riders sent out their strongest armed force yet to put an end to Angron's rebellion once and for all, only 1,000 weakened gladiators remained. Angron knew that their chances were basically non-existent, but he was at peace, as he knew that he and his warrior brothers and sisters, his best friends, would die for a just cause. Never again would he be forced to kill others against his will at the command of some all-powerful warlord who treated him as nothing more than a tool. Right? Wait, why is there a huge spaceship in the sky? Yeah! Oh, then the Emperor showed up, and you can guess where this is going. For whatever reason, the Emperor, who was well aware of what Angron had had to go through on this backwater shit-ass planet, decided to go full douchebag mode. He could have sent down his custodies to assist Angron and his warriors. He could have gone down personally. He also could have sent down the entire legion of warriors made with Angron's DNA that he had brought with him. But no. Instead of providing Angron with any help whatsoever, he just teleported him up to his ship, where Angron was able to witness his fellow gladiators, the only family or friends that he had ever known, get slaughtered. And believe it or not, this made Angron angry. He would go on to kill quite a few of his own warriors who were sent into the dungeon he was being held in to try to calm him down before Karn, who, spoiler alert, basically ends up being like a mini Angron in almost every sense, off in the future, was able to talk some sense into him. From that point on, Angron became regretfully resigned to his new fate. He began to lead his legion, which he renamed the World Eaters, as they waged war across the galaxy, and let them know at very regular intervals that he hated them, and wouldn't be mad if they all just died. Alright, now that we're caught up on why Angron is actually one of the most tragic characters 40k has ever seen, I can get back to the brain rot. Angron and the World Eaters, as you may have predicted, did not have a very nuanced approach to pacifying worlds. The Thousand Sons scoured the libraries of every civilization they destroyed for knowledge they could take back to Prospero. The Space Wolves encouraged every planet to join in the glory of the Allfather, rather than face destruction. And the World Eaters ate worlds, metaphorically. They just really like to leave behind complete and total devastation wherever they went. Eventually, the Space Marines of the World Eaters also all underwent the implantation of the Butcher's Nails, except for the Psychers and the Dreadnoughts of the Legion. The Psychers didn't get them because, for whatever reason, they would die horribly after the procedure had been completed, and the Dreadnoughts didn't get them because, oh my god, can you imagine a Dreadnought with Butcher's Nails implanted in whatever's left of its brain? You'd basically get a bunch of giant metal Angrons. And after the implantation of the Butcher's Nails in the Warriors of the World Eaters, the writing was on the wall for how useful they would prove to be. They basically devolved into a force of bloodthirsty savages who would deploy on a planet and just immediately get lost in a berserker-style rage that led to a complete breakdown in communications as they all just ran around shooting and punching everything. In the novel Betrayer, Lotara Saren, commanding officer of the World Eaters' flagship, Conqueror, basically had to be part-time ship commander, part-time badass warrior woman, and full-time mom to every single World Eater that was supposed to report to her because they'd lose any semblance of tactics and leave it to her to try to figure out what the hell was going on at any given time. And that includes Angron, you know, the guy who was actually in charge of literally everything. And she was also on the flagship the whole time, you know, in space. There's even an excerpt from Betrayal where Karn asks one of his officers to report on Angron's whereabouts in the middle of battle, and the officer tells him that the last time Angron had been seen, he was lost to the nails and was eating people. And I mean, come on, no wonder the World Eaters fell to chaos. As your Primarch, you could have had Roboute Guilliman, the Avenging Sun. You could have had Sanguinius, the Great Angel. You could have had Rogel Dorn, the Unyielding One. The World Eaters had Angron, the People Eater. Eventually, at the end of Betrayal, Angron, the World Eaters, and Lorgar and the Word Bearers found themselves back on Nuceria. In the time that Angron was gone after the Emperor abducted him, Nuceria had become an imperial world, and the Imperium, being the Imperium, had allowed it to continue with its whole Gladiator arenas, planet-wide poverty ruling elite system. When Angron burst into the palace in Deshea, he quickly learned from one of the guards that his reputation on Nuceria had been the victim of some High Rider propaganda over the centuries. He had become known as a coward who had fled the battle in the mountains, when in truth he had been abducted from it against his will. And believe it or not, this made him, let's say it together now, angry. Like, really angry. He ordered the entire planet's population to be destroyed, and his warriors quickly set about making sure that it was. As the World Eaters and the Word Bearers continued their destruction of Nuceria, however, who would show up to save the day? Why, none other than Roboute Guilliman himself. See, Angron and Lorgar had been wreaking quite a lot of havoc on quite a few planets in Ultramar, and Big Bobby G was not too happy about it. As his Ultramarines engaged the warriors of the two legions, Guilliman found himself in a 2v1 battle against Lorgar and Angron. Lorgar quickly disengaged and started chanting a bunch of crazy words that had never been spoken in reality before, and then it started raining blood. He was performing the ritual that would save Angron's life, as the butcher's nails were in fact killing him. So that's good. But he was also performing the ritual that would turn Angron into a ginormous demon monster. So that's bad. As Angron gained the upper hand against Guilliman, Lorgar saw his opportunity. He called forth into the warp, and with the blood god Khorne's blessing, Angron's body became frozen as the power of the Immaterium began to flow into him. His body began to break and reform. From his skin to his bones to his neural synapses, he was remade. And after all that, he was still angry. Guilliman and the Ultramarines would have a certified what the actual f*** was that moment and perform a very fast tactical retreat, aka getting the hell out of there as quickly as possible because holy shit, one of the Primarchs made it start raining blood, and then another Primarch turned into a giant demon dragon lizard thing with fire coming out of its eyes. Following Lorgar and Angron's crusade through Ultramar and Angron's transformation on Nuceria, the World Eaters kept right at what they were good at, killing stuff. In fact, as the heresy really got kicked into high gear and Horus demanded that the traitor legions muster at Ulanor to prepare for the invasion of the Sol System, Angron was like, no, and led his warriors on a bloody rampage across the galaxy, just killing people and collecting their skulls to build a big cool chair for Angron aboard the Conqueror. Eventually, Angron did join the traitor forces as they assaulted Terra and demanded to Horus that he be the one to assault the Imperial Palace. Angron would soon learn after that the Death Guard and Mortarion were chosen instead of him and his legion, and he got really angry. In fact, he was so angry that he began to slaughter everyone that crossed paths with him in the hallways of the Conqueror. Remember Lotera Sarin, the commanding officer of the ship, who, by the way, was like, 35 years old at this stage? Like, pretty young, and was forced into babysitting every single World Eater? Yeah, she was still doing that. She became so concerned that Angron would murder the tech priests in charge of the plasma reactor, which would cause the ship to explode, that she literally had to make a secret plan with Karn and Night Lord's Captain Gendor Scrivok to try to contain Angron. Karn was sent to talk to Angron, at which point Angron told him that he knew of Karn's destiny to become the chosen champion of Khorne. The problem was, Angron wanted to be the chosen champion of Khorne, and Karn, being destined to become the chosen champion, made him angry. So they started fighting each other. I need to pause here and just say this is so funny. Like, imagine any other Primarch, any of them, even the traitors, whose reaction to literally anything is to just try to just beat the shit out of whoever's standing in front of them. It's so only Angron. Anyway, now we're going to skip ahead approximately 10,000 or so years, because most of those 10,000 years can be summed up in the same way I just summed up Angron and Karn's fight. Angron get angry. Angron fight what made him angry. Angron kill what made him angry. Angron still angry. In 444 M41, Angron and a newly reformed band of World Eaters invaded the planet of Armageddon and unleashed a level of devastation that can only appropriately be called Armageddon. This invasion was actually a great example of Angron demonstrating his ability to finally grasp the concepts of tactics and strategy, something that he became unable and unwilling to do before his ascension to demonhood. You know, because the butcher's nails were rotting his brain, and he was more concerned with eating people and arguing with everyone else than actually planning anything. Don't get me wrong though. Remember in the beginning of the video where I said that Angron doesn't really plot or plan stuff? I'm still sticking to my guns on that. Sure, he is capable of a little bit of thinking here and there now, but it doesn't really go beyond, I'm gonna get all these guys together so we can slaughter people on Armageddon and build some cool monuments out of skulls. I'm pretty sure that's what he sounds like. Actually, he didn't even know that he was going to Armageddon. A giant space hulk called the Devourer of Stars had just appeared above a demon world he controlled, and he saw its arrival as the opportunity to get his sons, who were basically just a bunch of pre-transformation mini Angrons at this point, to stop brutally slaughtering each other. They all climbed aboard the Devourer of Stars and got off once it arrived at Armageddon so that they could start brutally slaughtering whoever awaited them on the surface. It eventually took the combined effort of the Armageddon Steel Legion, the Armageddon Planetary Defense Force, the Space Wolves, and the Grey Knights to finally banish Angron from Armageddon, and then that kicked off the whole Months of Shame thing, which nearly devolved into the Space Wolves entering a civil war against the Inquisition, but that's a whole other story. Around 500 years later, Angron would almost emerge again on Armageddon as the forces of Khorne and Tzeentch attacked the planet, which was already in the midst of a massive war between the Imperials and the Orcs. Now, you know what they say, third time's the charm. And this was the third war for Armageddon. And when I say third time's the charm, I mean that in the sense that this third war was the craziest of them all. It was absolutely insane. The Imperials and the Orcs were forced to actually fight together against the demonic forces invading the planet. These ceasefires were doomed to never last long, but still, that's absolutely crazy. Over half of the planet became transformed into a sort of demon world as the demonic forces took hold, and it took elements from 9 Space Marine chapters to prevent the ritual that would have allowed Angron to return to Armageddon for a second time. However, in excellent news for the Crayon Eaters of the world, myself included, Angron is actually doing better than ever. As a demon, he has always been limited in his power or ability to stay manifested in reality by the amount of warp power available to him. But in the era Indomitus, Angron is now able to stay in real space longer. And when he is banished, he is able to come back much quicker. Instead of having to wait years, after only 8 weeks, 8 days, and 8 hours, Angron is able to re-emerge into real space. His forces, the warbands descended from his world eaters who spent thousands of years killing mostly each other, have also become more unified under Angron's rule. Angron isn't without his equals though. He fought and defeated Blood Angel's Lord Commander and second oldest man ever, Dante, but before he could kill him, newly awakened Primarch of the Dark Angels and definitely oldest man ever, Lionel Johnson, was able to defeat Angron in combat and banish him back to the warp by cutting his head off. And you know what? I have a feeling, call it a hunch, that being defeated and decapitated and banished back to the warp by a dude who had just woken up from a 10,000 year nap might have made Angron just a little tiny bit angry. But do you know what doesn't make me angry? The fact that I, for some crazy reason, have channel members on a website full of Angrons and World Eaters. You guys are Lotara Saren, chill, laid back, and somehow cool, despite all the chaos. If you'd like to support my channel, you can do so by liking, commenting, subscribing, or even becoming a channel member by clicking the link in the description. As always, thank you so much for watching. See ya!